Let's talk about failed saves, psychic explosions, and mismanaged plasma guns, with 10 examples of just the worst luck in Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk a little bit about bad luck in 40k and go through a whole bunch of different anecdotes where the dice gods have become very angry indeed and suddenly decided that it really isn't someone's day. 40k is a dice game after all. While you can always do your best to manage the probabilities and make sure that you have the best chance of succeeding, sometimes the dice just say no, and sometimes in hilariously spectacular fashion. With that in mind, today we've got 10 anecdotes or short stories that were posted onto one of my community posts talking about bad luck. I asked you guys to share some examples of bad luck in 40k, and I picked a few of them out of the selection that I thought were particularly interesting and maybe worth talking about. Thanks to all you guys who contributed there, and I look forward to hearing many more tales of dice misery down in the comments. Starting up, let's talk about good old-fashioned plasma fire. Apparently someone managed to lose 5 Hellblasters, rolling 8 ones off 10 dice on an overcharge, the Primary Space Marines being all ready to lay into the foe, and then just roundly managed to explode every single member of the squad. I'm going to guess that they didn't have anything helpful like a captain nearby. Getting to re-roll those ones to hit is pretty important if you can. Though if you manage to get 8 ones on the first roll, it'd be pretty likely that you'd still lose 1 or 2. Whenever you're rolling overcharged plasma, it makes sense to roll each Hellblaster's roll individually. If you do happen to get super unlucky and roll a double 1 for any of them, it only kills 1 Hellblaster, and if you roll them all together then you might have a better chance of losing multiple models. Even with optimal rolling though, if you roll them all individually, you still have a chance of losing the entire squad worth of Hellblasters, about 1 in every 375 times worth of overcharging, and there'll be plenty more times than that you might lose 3 or 4 models. Next up, we've got a lone wolf completing a mission. The short story is we were slogging it out and the score was close. I didn't realise how close it was until I counted up during the last turn of the game and realised we were tied. He had a single Space Wolf Terminator in my deployment zone just standing there. I reminded him that he could at least try and get the final retrieved Nachman data, and he would have to roll a 1 for it to work, as typically with this one for small units now you have to roll equal or less to the models in the squad. Apparently this guy promptly does that, and then the poster loses the game because of a single hero Terminator, and he isn't even mad. It was awesome. It is pretty fun when you get games that are close enough to come down to a single dice roll. Shows that it's been really close, whether or not it's just one model legging it at the last moment, or whether or not you're just able to kill the very last model in a squad holding a vital objective. I like to think that this Space Wolf in particular gets to note down some data analysis on his saga, maybe not quite as exciting as killing a whole load of Xenos or Chaos, but I'm sure the Wolf Lords of the Fang will appreciate his efforts in winning the mission nonetheless. Next, a story from 5th edition. Apparently a guy got a hit on 14 Tower Fire Warriors with a Vindicator back in 5th edition. You'd be able to get that many hits with a Vindicator because you would have been using blast templates and they might have been able to cover multiple squads. Out of those 14 dice, apparently 12 ones were rolled, needing a 2+, and then to add insult to injury, the last 2 wounds were saved by a cover save. Could have been a 4+ or a 5+ in 5th edition usually. If this one is accurate, then it's perhaps one of the most unlucky rolls out of this entire video. In theory, I think 12 or more 1s on 14 dice will be something like 1 in 33 million rolls. That doesn't even account for the other ones passing their cover save, so that's some pretty insane bad luck there. They're certainly not out of the realms of possibility with the amount of dice that get rolled in a Warhammer game and all the rolls that might be improbable. Next up, there's a fun little story about cascading vehicle explosions, and the story goes like this. This happened to my opponent during a recent game. He was playing Death Watch when I was playing Death Guard. In the 4th round, I moved my Lord of Contagion to 6 inches of his Redemptor Dreadnought and used the Skull of Glothilla relic, a plague skull that deals out a bunch of mortal wounds. I believe it gets D3 mortal wounds on 6s and 1 mortal wound on every 4 or 5, so it does have a fairly decent chance of inflicting a lot of damage. This guy then proceeds to roll 4 6s, 2 4s and a 1, and even rolls somewhat high on the damage results of those, getting 11 wounds on the Dreadnought in total, killing it, and then subsequently exploding within his castle, killing his Warlord, a Tech Marine, a Relic Contemptor Dreadnought, and crippled a Rhino. Back in 8th edition, the Redemptors exploded for 6 inches and D6 mortal wounds, so they really could cause some massive damage if they did go down in a bad way. Then apparently this Relic Contemptor Dreadnought exploded as well, that one finishing off the last wounds off the Rhino, and then 5 veterans inside the Rhino attempt to get out and roll 4 1s, another 4 Space Marines dead. Then after all of that, he had a final veteran left on the midfield objective, and of course he then fails morale and it runs away. A pretty crazy set of events there. I guess once the Redemptor did explode, you're going to be dealing some mass damage one way or the other. The Rhino would have had to be damaged, I suppose, for it to be taken down. And to kill the characters, I guess you'd have to roll at least somewhat high on the mortal wounds. It is quite fun whenever you get cascading vehicle explosions. It does happen from time to time. Though it is pretty ridiculous just how much damage this Redemptor caused to the entire centre of the board. Next up, it's Space Marines killing Necrons. I had a Centurion squad unload into a 20-strong Necron warrior unit and killed 17. My opponent then made 15 4+ reanimation rolls and had them stand back up. I'm guessing that if the Necron warriors had a 4+ reanimation roll, they must have been under the sway of something like a Canoptech reanimator, which isn't really the worst idea in the world if you can chain a squad back to them. Necron warriors are particularly good at standing back up as well, as they get to reroll ones to reanimate to, and I guess if they were rolling 4+, you would expect half of them to get back up. Still though, 15 out of 17 reanimated is a pretty crazy amount. Using a dice probability character, it sounds like it's around a 1 in 850 chance that you get that many warriors stand back up. I guess the Centurions just had some bad luck targeting some warriors that had some particularly living metal that day. A big Blood Angels Deep Strike next. I position my Deep Striking Blood Angels perfectly around my Sanguinary Priest with a relic that gives a reroll to charges. I think that will be the icon of the angel. A total of 5 units were in charge range, all of them had an 8-inch charge, so that's effectively 10 rolls at 8+ charges. Usually with an 8+ charge, that's around about a 2/3 chance to get a squad in, so you usually expect something like 3 squads out of the set. At the glorious end of it, 1 squad managed to charge, and that one was half shredded in Overwatch, and then eaten by Morven Val, aka Morven Time Val, at least in this anecdote. Having played a fair bit of Blood Angels and Genestealer cults myself, I certainly can feel the pain of a whole load of re-rolling charges at 8 inches just whiffing. I think a lot of Blood Angels players will miss the days of the big 3d6-inch charge that you could get for a stratagem. At least that way you could pretty much guarantee one squad getting in. Mass Deep Strike just isn't particularly reliable these days. You've got a very real chance of getting lots of squads in, but there's a pretty high chance of things just really not going your way in a big style. I think the odds of this one were somewhere around 1 in 30 to 1 in 50. That's a lot of 8-inch charges to fail with a bunch of rerolls. Psychic time next, and one person writes this literally just happened to me. In one psychic phase I rolled Perils twice in a row, the first Snake Eyes, then a 12. This killed my Chaos Sorcerer after I rolled super high on the damage for the mortal wounds. The sorcerer in question didn't get to do anything, and presumably that would have caused a fair bit of splash damage from mortal wounds from the big Perils explosion. I must admit it is quite funny just to think of a Psyker turning up to the game, and then immediately trying 2 spells, failing them horrendously, and just exploding straight off the table. The army on the other side of the table must have been watching with curiosity. Between having to roll at least somewhat high on the 2d3 and also getting 2 perils in the first 2 casts, the chance of it killing your own Psyker in literally 2 psychic spells is something around about 1 in 2000. I guess it's really not all that uncommon to take some chip damage from mortal wounds, but you have to double down on getting even more wounds on yourself if you're going to perils yourself to death. Definitely not all that hard to do though. I guess hopefully having a command point spare to potentially reroll a Fatal Perils could be a good idea, perhaps as much to save your character as it is to actually cast the spell. Knights charging into combat next, and this guy had a supercharged melee knight gallant charge 2 Chaos Knights at half health each. He ran in with 8 attacks. Neither of the knights had any defense. All they had was their standard armor save, which had gone to a 6+ from the AP-3 of the Thunderstrike gauntlet, and the opponent rolled 4 6s, negating all the damage, presumably at 8 damage a pop if they're using the more recent Knight Codex. The maneuver cost them 12 victory points outright, as I'm sure the Chaos Knights would hit them back very, very hard indeed, particularly if there were 2 of them. Passing all 4 of the 6-up saves equates to around about a 1 in 1300 chance, a pretty massive swing there, and it sounds like he'd already been unlucky seeing as the Gallant started out with 8 attacks and only wound up with 4 wounds in the first place. It definitely goes to show just how swingy those big attacks can be. Even if you get a save or 2 through, you're getting ridiculously horrendous damage with the huge damage profile. But even the opponent rolling a couple of 6s could save them an enormous amount of wounds. Sticking with Knights next, and this is actually one that happened to me personally. This was an 8th edition tournament game, and I was using Allied Guard and Knights. I had a very cheap Astropath that was casting Psychic Maelstrom for a bit of mortal wound damage. He proceeds to roll a double 1 to fail to cast and cause a Perils. I command point rerolled that into a double 6, and this was then followed up with him taking 3 mortal wounds as well, getting a 3 on the D3 damage, and Astropaths only have 3 wounds in the first place. Rather unfortunately, the Astropath was only just in range of a damaged Imperial Knight, The knight had used the Tyrannus stratagem to resurrect from death last turn, so only had 2 wounds remaining, but was in a position to do some pretty major damage. Of course the Perils damage was enough to take the knight down, and then I also rolled for the knight to explode as well. A 2d6 impact of d6 mortal wounds to all the rest of the units are nearby in the army. I think I took something like another 12 mortal wounds from that explosion on top of the damage already dealt. It was pretty funny to be honest, and it does cause me to rethink whether or not I really need to cast a psychic power if things are going well, or particularly if that psychic power is very unlikely to have any decent effects next turn, and whether or not you're actually going to be gaining anything versus the risk of taking some mortals via Perils. Finally, we'll end with a very old one. This one's from back in 3rd edition, where someone was at a tournament in 2003 or 4, fielding a squad of 5 Grey Knight Terminators allied with their Ultramarines. The Terminators were shot at by an enemy squad of scouts, forcing them to take 6 armor saves, and the poster then proceeds to roll 6 of them to be 1s and loses the entire squad then and there. Apparently the tournament organisers were taking pictures throughout the day, including some of the terrible roll, which apparently they might have saved somewhere on an old hard drive. To be honest, it sounds like the scouts were quite fortunate already to have managed to score 6 wounds on the Terminators, but even so at that point, passing 6 2-up saves isn't usually the worst thing in the world. I believe to actually lose the entire squad of 5 from 6 wounds will be something like 1 in 1500 chance, so still pretty out there. I do remember back from 7th edition and before, where it's often best just to stack saves on these big 2+ save units. I remember things like the Guard Wyvern just stacking loads and loads of armor saves on Terminators actually being a pretty reasonable way to wipe them out. Not something that's anywhere near as efficient in 9th edition. You'd have to be failing an awful lot more 2+ saves before a 3-wound Terminator squad goes down. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed a few tales of 40k woes on the tabletop that will make a lamenter blush. Looking forward to hearing your guys' tales of tabletop woe down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k things coming, with new videos out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the things on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find it down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few perks, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.